Well, we need to talk a little bit about communism here in respect to Marx and also in respect to how socialism and communism played themselves out on the world stage. And I really don't want to get too far into the political philosophy here, but I do want to talk about communism in regards to what Marx envisioned in society. Now we know that communism played itself out in a very negative fashion and still continues to do so in some countries around the world. And so in some respects it was bastardized by the political machines of those countries that used it to serve their best political interests. The Soviet bloc, those Eastern European bloc nations in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and into the 70s and 80s in some countries. The Czech Republic, which is the former Czechoslovakia, was communist until the late 1980s when they had the Velvet Revolution, and that largely overthrew their form of government. So they're still in the process of rebuilding from the old school communist era. So let's talk a little bit about what communism is in its purest form. Communism is a revolutionary socialist movement, and it was designed to create a classless society. Classless, moneyless, and stateless, and it was supposed to be structured on the common ownership of the means of production. All right, now what is the means of production? Well, the means of production are those things that any given society has which need to be used by the members of that society, or can be used by the members of that society. So, for example, our utilities. We need electricity to exist in our contemporary world. And so a communist society would say that we don't pay money to some person who owns an electric company. A communist society would say the electricity is there, we work the plant, we keep everything going, but we use it as we need it. So this is a society structured on the need of a person rather than a person making profit. And so it's a little hard for us to envision, having grown up in a capitalist society where you pay for what you need, but in a pure utopian communist society, which is really what Marx envisioned, that sort of pay for need would go away. And we would all be able to somehow exist getting what we needed based on our individual needs. You know, and I have to say to you, and I'm sure you will agree, in a complex type of structure that we have today, to do completely away with this type of society and try to move towards a more communistic type of living would be very, very challenging for us. I think we could agree that perhaps, at least for what we see in our immediate futures, this will not happen. This type of thinking, however, has had a significant influence on many contemporary societies around the world and continues to have an influence on our society today. We tend to be scared when people say socialism in America. So pure communism is a specific stage in the historical development of societies, and it emerges out of the problems that we've had in a capitalist society. Marx asserts that in a country that has very good means of production, eventually we'll have an overabundance of goods. We'll have a superabundance, he calls it, of goods and materials. And he says that in a communist society, these goods need to be distributed based on need. And this gets to the core of socialist philosophy. He says that in our society today, we distribute based on class. This is a market system where if you have enough money to exchange for a good or service that you need, you can obtain that good or service. In a communist society, you would get that good based on need. And there are some problems inherent in looking at this type of classless, stateless, moneyless society in that people need to have some motivation They need to have a reason to go and work in that electric plant. If they're not going to get a paycheck because they don't need that money, well then why are they incentivized to work hard? And it is a really significant flaw in the system of communism that we don't have any external stimulus provided to us to work together as a functioning social unit. So the notion of communism, the notion of socialism, is a scary idea for America, and we have to really think about why that would be. Socialism in America, the American Socialist Movement, began in the mid-1800s with immigrants who came here from Western Europe. U.S. socialism wasn't considered to be theoretical in its orientation, as was the socialism of the West, Western Europe in particular. Socialism in America was more born of experiences. And so while all socialism comes from the theoretical foundations of Marx, here in America it was represented in a different way. Some of the basic ideas of Marx, however: history is the history of the oppressed. There are two classes in society. The means of production is being concentrated in the hands of a few people, and the gap between the wealthy and the poor will get wider as capitalism increases. Marx shows that the labor market is not a free market. He shows that it is founded on inequality, and he shows that capitalism is creating an instrument of its own destruction. Now, what does that mean, an instrument of its own destruction? So what Marx does is he analyzes capitalism as a system, and this is what makes him essentially a sociologist. He doesn't look at society as being populated by bad people doing unethical things. Rather, he looks at the system of capitalism as an economic system, and he comes up with a couple of assertions. The first assertion of his Communist Manifesto: the revolutionary element in the world is capitalism. He says that this system is a system that requires us to have a revolution and change. He says the bourgeoisie, the haves, cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the means of production. What does that mean? Well, once they've exploited the workers in one area, they've got to figure out new ways to exploit those workers. And here's where Lenski's technology can be thought of as a change mechanism. One of Marx's very famous statements: all that is solid melts into air. This realistically means, from a philosophical point of view, that everything changes. Fourth, the need for an ever-expanding market chases the bourgeoisie all over the globe. This means that the owners of the means of production, people who own corporations, people who are the owners of industry, have to look all over the globe in their chase for cheap labor to satisfy our desire for consumerism. And finally, fifth, national industries will be destroyed in the search for new markets. As the owners of the means of production search for cheaper and cheaper labor, the structure of societies will begin to disintegrate, because the people who were working in those very industries that held up the society will lose their jobs when those industries move elsewhere in that search for cheap labor. I want you to bear in mind that Marx wrote this in the 1800s. So while a lot of people take Marx's work to be very anti-capitalism, really he said that capitalism was a fairer system than feudalism had been, but he sees it as a stepping stone towards this fairer society that he describes as a communist utopia. Capitalism is where we are today. He says that socialism will be the next step, and after that, communism will arrive. Time will only tell, I doubt that this will happen in any of our lifetimes. It certainly may happen in our grandchildren's lifetimes, but we won't be around to see it. All right? I hope this helps. Take care. We'll talk again soon.